All right, so as mentioned, you guys, all three of you are part of a pretty exclusive club. I want to start, though, by kind of hearing the route that it took for each of you to get to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Darryl, I'm going to start with you just because I know here, being in London, I actually saw someone with a Knights jersey with Sittler on the back.
Wow.
It all really began in London, didn't it?
Well, I grew up in the little village of St. Jacobs, was drafted by the Knights in 1967. They were still called the Nationals back then, but I left home. Turk Broda was my coach, and it was great just this past month. Turk's one of the honored members in Legends Row. They're going to have a statue of Turk, so it brings back lots of memories. But I played here 3 years. The draft wasn't until you were 20. I was drafted by the Leafs first round. I'll tell you how I was drafted. I was building swimming pools here in Toronto, trying to build some muscles and make some extra cash. And I heard it on the radio that afternoon that I was drafted by the Leafs. So that's how I found out I was drafted. A little different than it is for these guys nowadays. And then the Leafs called me a couple weeks later and said they had drafted me. But that's how I made it to the National Hockey League, being drafted by the Leafs. And I remember my roots here in London.
And just a quick aside, because Doug, you told me something this afternoon I had no idea about your brother.
Yeah, I was a London Knights fan when I was 3 years old. My brother played with Darryl and Dan Maloney, so I was a Knights fan for a couple of years, but not necessarily now.
Exactly. Yeah, he's doing everything he can to make sure that Christian and Mitch aren't in the lineup when they play the Kingston Frontenacs.
I've already called Dale. You guys are missing curfew. That's too bad.
Okay, for you though, coming to Toronto, of course, we all know you had success with the Calgary Flames, winning a Stanley Cup there. But I read a story that Cliff Fletcher just last week was telling about. It was actually New Year's Eve in 91, I think, that the deal was made. But of course, back then, well, it was New Year's Day, so the NHL office was closed, so the deal couldn't happen until January 2nd. But how did it all calm down for you?
We were playing in San Francisco before San Jose. The rink was built. We were at the Cow Palace, and I woke up about 7 in the morning to go to the bathroom, and the hotel room had a joining door, and that joining door was beside our GM, Doug Risebrough. So I happened to hear my name a couple of times. I'm going to trade that little bastard. I took him to arbitration. He wasn't too happy. So, yeah, New Year's Eve, I told my teammates I wasn't coming back. I was going to go play with Team Canada in Calgary until I got traded. And next day, it was a 10-player deal.
It was a big one. We'll talk a little bit more about your time in Toronto. Rick, over to you. So you played junior with Sherbrooke, drafted by the Vancouver Canucks, and it was a trade from the Canucks to Toronto that brought you into the fold. What do you remember about how all that went down?
Well, actually, it was pretty interesting when I was drafted in junior, because I was drafted in two leagues, in the OHA at the time. It wasn't called the OHL, it was the OHA, and the Quebec League. The Toronto Marlies drafted me in the OHA, and Sherbrooke in the Quebec League. So I had a choice, and I was Sherbrooke's first pick in the first round. I was a Marlies pick in the second round. Thought it was a better idea to go to Sherbrooke, so I did. Then I got drafted by Vancouver. Much like Darryl, we didn't go to a draft at that point. We just waited at home for a phone call. I found out I was drafted by the Canucks. And I went out there, and things started out okay, and then all of a sudden kind of turned sour, and Harry Neal didn't take too kindly to me for the most part. And it was kind of a funny story, because we were on the road a lot. We'd go on 14-day road trips regularly in Vancouver. So, but when we got there, there was no apartments available in the entire city. It was just, everything was full. So we had to wait for this one tower to be built, which just happened to be next door to Harry Neal's tower. So I lived with Glenn Hanlon for a while, and I forget the individual's name, and I'll think about it maybe later, but we had already gotten an apartment, but we had to wait for it to be completed. So anyway, we moved in when we got back from a long road trip. We had a little kind of housewarming, apartment warming one night, and the next morning, my phone rings beside my bed at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we didn't even have our phones hooked up or anything. And I thought, that's strange. So picked it up, and someone on the other end said, "It's Harry, let me in." thinking, I just hung up. I thought it was one of the boys playing a prank. So phone again, and then I realized at that point it was Harry, and I knew you had to press something on the phone to open the door, and I didn't hit the right button. Third time he just said, never mind, come down to the lobby, and then he told me I was traded, and I was on a plane 4 hours later and on my way to Toronto.
That's the way it happens. All of you had real highlights within your careers, but particularly in Toronto. And Darryl, we just celebrated the 40th anniversary of one of yours. 10
So how many
points.
watched that game? How many are old enough to remember that game?
Ah, I see
There
some
you go.
hands.
Yeah, that was a nice anniversary. It was nice for the Leafs to celebrate it, bring my teammates back. I hadn't seen many of them for a while, but it was really nice that Dave Reese came.
The goalie.
That was the last game he ever played in the National Hockey League, believe it or not. I keep telling him I put him in the Guinness Book of World Records, his name, but that was a wonderful night and a nice tribute from our organization.
And Doug, you have to think back to 93. The city was just electric with the playoff series. When you think of that and that team and the success, really between the Blue Jays and the Leafs, like those were some pretty golden times in Toronto sports history.
It really was. It was just electric. The change of bringing Cliff Fletcher in and then Pat Burns and bringing in some older players. It was probably one of the closest teams that we had, and everybody accepted their role. Didn't matter if you're third line, fourth line, and it was just a great run for us.
And Rick, 50 goals. You did it 3 times, the first Maple Leaf to do it. That's pretty impressive stuff. What do you remember? Yeah, we don't even see many 50-goal seasons anymore. What do you remember, though, as you were getting closer to that magical number?
Well, you're not really thinking about it. You're moving along, and yeah, things were going good. And I had some great centermen. Billy Derlega was a centerman that year with me. I had some other great teammates that we had a good power play that year. Boria was on the point. But anyway, I got close, and all of a sudden somebody from the press came up to me. I think I was at 43, and said, you got a lot of games left. You could become the first Maple Leaf to score 50 goals. And I looked at him like he was crazy. And I said, I just, all of a sudden, all the great Maple Leafs, including one of the gentlemen right beside me that played all those years, and I thought, one of them must have scored 50 goals, but it hadn't been done. So anyway, I just moved along, and then on a Saturday night, we were playing the Chicago Blackhawks, and Frank Mahovlich had the record, I believe, at 48, I think it was. And that night we were playing the Blackhawks. Tony Esposito was in goal, and I remember he couldn't see the puck if you shot it from outside the blue line. So I got 4 that night. 2 were from outside the blue line. And the next game I think was Monday night at home against St. Louis, and I got the 50th against Mike Liut. It's obviously a night I'll never forget, but yeah, I was astounded that it hadn't been done before, and to be able to be the first. Well, it's always nice to be the first.
Well put. All right, Darryl, your tenure with the Maple Leafs. Some good times, some bad times. Harold Ballard always made it interesting. What was your relationship like with him?
Well, I didn't mind Harold. It was Punch Imlach. He was a bit of a jerk.
How do you really feel, Darryl?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate. I had a no-trade contract. I was a captain of the team. I was vice president of the Players Union. But when Punch came in, he wanted to try to change all that. And, I'm still am. I'm a believer if something's right, you stick up for it. And I was sticking up for my teammates and for the Players Union. And through that, it became controversy all the time. It wasn't much fun. I'm not proud of it. But we hung out, and both of those guys were gone. But Harold Ballard was good to me. And I'll say this. When I scored the overtime goal in the Canada Cup in '76, which was one of the highlights of my career, he had the receptionist at Maple Leaf Gardens answer the phone in the home of Darryl Sittler. And then on my 10-point night, shortly after that, he gave my late wife Wendy, and I a beautiful tea service set. And so there's lots of good things about Harold Ballard that I like.
And Doug, you mentioned Pat Burns a little earlier. Just expand upon what he meant to that team and the kind of guy that he was, in addition to being a great coach.
Yeah, when Pat, obviously coming from Montreal, you know, first day with the media asked him, what do you think of your team? He goes, well, we got Darryl Gilmour. He was actually a goalie in the league. But so Pat introduced himself, and we went out and had a pop or two. And the thing he said to me was, you better be the best player in practice, and that's going to carry over into games. And he was intimidating, believe me. He scared the crap out of me. So, but he was a good friend. He got the best out of everybody, and we loved him for it.
May he rest in peace. He was a wonderful man. Well deserved. And Rick, I know you had a number of coaches during your time. It was a bit of a revolving door, wasn't it?
Yeah, we had a lot of coaches, and we had a whole bunch of goaltenders.
Like,
I think the last count, we had 13 goaltenders in the 6.5 years that I was there.
who were some of the guys?
The goaltenders?
Yeah.
Well, Palmy, Paul Harrison, Vincent Tremblay, Bunny Larocque, Yuri Sira, Breguet, Bester. I can't even remember the rest of them. There were so many. I think I counted 12 at one point. And we had, who were our coaches? Who was the first guy there? You were still
Yeah,
there.
Floyd Smith. Didn't you have Dick Duff
No,
for a
before
bit?
that.
Floyd Smith?
Floyd Smith,
Yeah.
Joe Crozier,
Joe Crozier.
Mike Nicolak, Dan Maloney, John Brophy. You know,
John Brophy. Now, there's a name I haven't heard for a
and
while.
with no malice or anything, you put them all in a room together, and I'm not sure between them all that they could go out and coach a real good hockey game, but, you know.
There were no Mike Babcock, right?
No, well, that's what I mean. I think he talked about Pat Burns. He had Roger Nielsen, who was very innovative and a great coach. And, then all of a sudden you name all those. So, anyway, it is what it is.
Just a thought from each of you what it meant to wear that C on any jersey, but particularly on a Toronto Maple Leaf jersey. And for you, Darryl, I think you followed Dave Keon, didn't you?
Well, I was fortunate. I was drafted in '70, so I played with the guys that won the Cup in '67. So I got to, play with them off the ice. Got to know what the tradition of the Maple Leafs meant to them, and passing it on to guys like myself. So George Armstrong was there, Ronnie Ellis, classy guy, and Dave Keon was Dave Keon was one of the hardest working players. Dougie talked about being the best guy in practice at Burns. He said, well, Dave Keon was the hardest working guy. And as a youngster, 20 years old, you watch this guy 31, 32 every day making himself better, even though he won the Conn Smythe, won Stanley Cups. That's what was important to me to carry on the legacy, so to speak.
Doug, for you?
For me, growing up, just like any other kid, Hockey Night in Canada, sitting around, and again, having the opportunity. I don't really remember, but when I was a London Knights fan, but watching Darryl grow up and play junior and then get to the next level. So, to put the C on, I followed Wendell, and one of the best leaders and great guy in the dressing room, tough as nails. So, again, just the history of the Toronto Maple Leafs being from Kingston, Ontario, it was amazing and great, something I'll never forget.
And Rick, I believe you followed Darryl.
Yeah, that's funny. Actually, as a kid, I remember watching him too, Doug, just like you. So, but no, I'm just kidding.
I grew up watching you.
And I grew up watching all of you.
Yeah, there we go. Wow.
I didn't have TV.
Yeah. Well, we are getting old. Okay, let's forget that. Let's not talk about that. I was lucky that I came in and Darryl was still there. Unfortunately, Darryl wasn't around for very long with us. And, I was pretty young. I was 22 years old, and I was pretty much just told by Harold that, you're the captain. And I really didn't believe that I was ready to be a captain at that point. I mean, obviously, it was a great honor to be told that, and it's the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like Doug said, you're watching them on Hockey Night in Canada. The Leafs or the Canadians, one or the other. And you certainly don't want to pick the red, white, and blue. But anyway, I only wish that maybe perhaps Darryl had been around for another year or so, that I could have learned a little bit more about what it was like, and because it took me a few years to really get into it. And we had a fairly old team at the time too. So I'm 22, and guys are 31, 32. They're not listening to me too often. So it was a trial by fire, but I worked through it, and it got better and better as time went on. And nevertheless, it was an honor that I think if you asked anybody in Canada, they would say, absolutely, I would take it and I would do it and I would be very proud of it.
All right, last question for each of you, and I'll take it to
except
today.
in Quebec, maybe. But.
Yeah, perhaps. So obviously a new regime now in Toronto. We have Brendan Shanahan, Lou Lamoriello, Mike Babcock behind the bench. Lou and Brendan have already shown that there will be changes. There will be pain that we heard from Mike Babcock about. But somehow the future looks a lot brighter than it has in Leafland for a while. What do you guys think?
Well, I pay for my season tickets, so I've saved some money on the playoff tickets the last little while. So I'm not lying. But no, I think they're
9 out of 10 years.
I think they're doing it the right way. Obviously, the kid behind me is the skill level, the talent that he has, and he'll bring it every night except Friday night.
Against Kingston. Okay, we've made that point.
But they are doing it the right way. And again, you look at Mark Hunter, the vision that he has with this hockey club here. He's taken that into Toronto. He's one of the hardest working guys I've ever seen. So they're going to be better.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the whole thing over the last number of years, and I've been around our organization, is they get very impatient. And whether it's the pressure from the media or the season ticket holder or the board of directors, they make changes too quickly, whether they trade a player away or whether they fire a coach or a general manager. So I think they're doing it the right way. Brendan Shanahan's a classy guy, obviously excellent at night here. And Mark Hunter's, he's got the experience and he's been given a job. He's hired a bunch of new people that he trusts and believes. And then hopefully we're all sitting here in 3 or 4 years from now and the Leafs are in the playoffs and we're excited about guys like Mitch and the other guys they drafted, and I believe we will be. So.
Yeah, I certainly don't disagree with either one of you. And the funny thing is I've been through kind of both of these things. When I played in the 80s, we drafted a lot of good hockey players, but Jerry McNamara, who was our general manager, he was bringing all these guys in at 18 years old, and a lot of them weren't, the maturity physically and mentally was not there for them to compete at the National Hockey League level. And we went through that for countless years until Wendell came along in '85. He was probably the only 18-year-old that ever played with us during that time that was actually ready. And so now I see this going on, but I see what they're doing. And I think for stability going forward for many, many years, like Detroit has, making the playoffs 24 straight years, this has to happen. And when you see all the fine young players that they have and they've drafted, that they're probably going to draft or they're going to trade for, it'll be sustainable over a longer period of time instead of trading away draft picks for older players and bringing them in thinking that, yeah, you know what, if we add that guy, we can probably win. And I think that's what happened a couple of times with some of the GMs that were here, was that I think they looked at their team and thought they were better than they were and went out and acquired a couple of older players that thought it would bring them over the hump, and it didn't work.
Well, the future certainly looks bright once again for the Maple Leafs, and I know Mitch Marner is going to be a part of that. But a big thank you again to Doug Gilmour, Darryl Sittler, and Rick Vaive for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.